Well then, goodbye, sweetheart. I had a great time with you. The car door slammed shut with a finality that sent a jolt through my chest. Before I could move, before I could even breathe, he pressed down on the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt, kicking up gravel and dust into the evening air. The engine roared, a sharp contrast to the eerie silence that followed. Within seconds, he was gone. Just like that. I stood frozen on the side of the empty road, my breath caught in my throat. My fingers instinctively tightened around the straps of my small backpack, the only thing I had left. The weight of it on my shoulders felt insignificant compared to the crushing realization settling in my chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. My pulse pounded in my ears as my mind raced to make sense of what had just unfolded. Maybe this was some kind of joke, a cruel, twisted prank. Any second now, he'd turn around, laughing, telling me he just wanted to scare me a little. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. My fingers fumbled over the screen as I hit call. Ring. Again. Again. A cold, automated voice broke the silence. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. No, that couldn't be right. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat erratic. I dialed again, pressing the button so hard my fingertip ached. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. My stomach twisted. I redialed, again and again. The response never changed. A hollow, sinking feeling spread through my chest. This wasn't a joke. I was alone. I turned my head slowly, scanning the desolate road stretching endlessly in both directions. Trees lined the edges, their dark silhouettes swaying in the evening breeze. The sky had begun to shift to dusk, the golden hues of sunset fading into purples and blues. I was in the middle of nowhere, in a foreign country. My throat felt tight as I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Think. I had to think. I unzipped my backpack and rummaged through it with frantic hands. My wallet, my passport, a half-empty bottle of water, some snacks, a phone charger, useless without an outlet. Everything else, my clothes, my toiletries, my hotel key, were still in his car. The car that was long gone. A sharp, stinging sensation pricked the back of my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not yet. I took a slow step forward, then another. The road was empty, stretching endlessly into the horizon. No cars, no people, nothing. A sickening wave of nausea rolled over me. How could he do this? Memories of the past few days flooded my mind, his hands in mine as we walked through the city streets, his laughter over candlelit dinners, the way he had whispered to me last night, telling me I was everything to him. Lies. It had all been lies. I clenched my jaw, forcing back the emotions threatening to spill over. Now wasn't the time to break down. I needed a plan. I checked my phone again. The battery was at 32%. No service. No Wi-Fi. I was stranded. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to move. I couldn't just stand here. I had to find someone, anyone, who could help. The road stretched on, empty and silent. My heart pounded harder with every step. I had never felt so alone. I never saw it coming. If someone had told me back then that this was how it would all end, I would have laughed in their face. I would have told them they were wrong, that they didn't know him like I did. Because back then, he was everything I had ever wanted. He was charming from the very beginning, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. The first time we met, he made me laugh within minutes, a genuine, uncontrollable kind of laughter that bubbled out of me before I could stop it. I remember the way he looked at me then, like he had just won something, like making me laugh had been his goal all along. "You have a beautiful smile," he had said, and the way he looked at me when he said it made me believe he meant it. He wasn't just charming, he was persistent. He pursued me in a way that felt exhilarating, like I was the most interesting person in the world. He texted me first every morning, asking how I slept. He planned dates with so much attention to detail that it felt like he had known me for years. Every restaurant he chose, every place he took me to, felt tailor-made for me. Our first official date was at a small rooftop restaurant, hidden away from the usual tourist crowds. He told me he had found it by accident, but I later realized he must have researched it in advance because it was exactly the kind of place I loved. Quiet, intimate, with fairy lights strung above us and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. "You deserve places like this," he had said, his fingers brushing against mine on the table. And I had believed him. He was thoughtful in ways that felt almost unreal. He remembered things I mentioned offhand, my favorite flowers, the book I had been wanting to read, the type of coffee I liked in the morning. A week after our first date, he showed up with a small gift, a copy of that book, with a note tucked inside. "Just in case you need an escape," he had written. I had felt something shift inside me that day. I was falling for him, hard and fast, and he was making sure there was nothing to stop me. Our dates always felt like something out of a movie. Late-night walks under city lights, where he would stop and pull me into an unexpected dance in the middle of the empty streets. Beach days where he would chase me into the waves, his laughter mixing with mine, his hands warm against my skin. Even simple nights in, curled up on the couch with a bottle of wine, felt like something special with him. He had this way of looking at me, like I was the only person in the world. It was intoxicating. I remember one night, after a long dinner, he had walked me home and just stood there at my door, looking at me like he was memorizing my face. "You're going to ruin me," he had whispered, smiling like he already loved me. And I had kissed him, believing in that moment that I had found something rare, something real. Everyone loved him. My friends, my family. He had a way of winning people over so effortlessly. My best friend once told me, "He's a keeper, you're lucky." And I had believed that too. I was happy. He made me feel safe, wanted, cherished. And when he proposed, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't some grand, dramatic moment. It was quiet, intimate, just the two of us on a weekend trip, watching the sun set over a lake. He had taken my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles as he looked at me with something soft in his eyes. "I don't want to imagine a life without you," he had said, pulling out a ring that was simple but perfect. "Marry me?" And I had said yes. Of course, I had said yes. I had never been so sure of anything in my life. Looking back now, I try to pinpoint the moment it all changed. The moment the man who had spent months convincing me he was perfect had started to unravel. The moment the dream he had built around us had started to crack. But I can't. Because back then, he wasn't a monster. He was my favorite person in the world, and I loved him. I kept replaying it in my head over and over, searching for the moment where everything had gone wrong. How did we go from him holding my face in his hands, telling me he couldn't live without me, to this? How did I end up abandoned on the side of the road, discarded like I meant nothing? I wanted to believe there had been some warning, some clue that I had missed, something that, if I had just paid closer attention, would have told me this was coming. But the truth was, there was no reason, no justification. Nothing I had done could have led to this. I had never betrayed him, never hurt him, never given him a reason to walk away, let alone like this. I loved him. I gave him everything. And in return, he had left me stranded in a foreign country without a second thought. But as much as I wanted to tell myself that there had been no signs, the memories started creeping in. The moments that I had brushed aside, the tiny fractures that I had ignored because I didn't want to see them for what they were. There was that time, months before the wedding, when he had suddenly gone cold for a few days. No texts, no calls. When I finally confronted him, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me he had just been busy. "You overthink too much," he had said, his voice so soft, so reassuring that I had believed him. And then there was the night we had gone to dinner with his friends, and someone had made a joke about marriage, something lighthearted, something silly. But I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers tapped against the table a little too fast. Later, when I asked if something was wrong, he waved it off with a laugh. "Nothing, sweetheart, just tired." And I let it go. Then there were the little things. The way he sometimes avoided making eye contact when talking about the future. The way he always made sure I was the one planning things, booking hotels, organizing flights. The way he sometimes disappeared into his phone, smiling at messages he never let me see. I had noticed. Of course, I had noticed. But I had convinced myself that I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. After all, he was wonderful to me, wasn't he? He bought me flowers. He told me he loved me every night. He held my hand and looked at me like I was his whole world. How could a man like that be capable of something so cruel? But the cracks had always been there, hadn't they? I had just been too blind, too in love, to see them for what they were. I thought about our honeymoon. It was supposed to be perfect. And for the most part, it was. We walked through cobblestone streets, hand in hand. We drank wine at sunset, laughing like we didn't have a care in the world. But there were moments, small, fleeting, where I had felt something off. Like the way he seemed distracted sometimes, his gaze drifting away when I spoke. Like the way he had gotten irritated when I asked if he was happy, snapping, "Why do you always ask me that?" Like the way he had disappeared for hours one afternoon, saying he just wanted to explore on his own. I hadn't questioned it. I had told myself that he needed space, that I was overanalyzing, that I was being clingy. And now, standing alone with nothing but my backpack, I hated myself for it. Had he been planning this all along? Had I ever really known him at all? A chill ran down my spine as I thought about it. Maybe he had never loved me. Maybe he had only loved the idea of me, the way I made him feel, the way I adored him without question. Or maybe he had loved me once, but had grown tired of me, and instead of ending things like a decent human being, he had decided to humiliate me. I didn't know which was worse. The wind picked up, rustling the trees around me, and I hugged myself, realizing how cold I suddenly felt. I had spent so much time loving him, trusting him, believing in him, and in return, he had left me with nothing. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. This wasn't just heartbreak. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something else. And for the first time, beneath the grief, beneath the shock, something new started to burn in my chest. Rage. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the last remnants of daylight. The road stretched ahead, empty and silent, an endless void swallowing my every step. My backpack felt heavier with each passing moment, the weight of my situation pressing down on me, suffocating. I had no idea where I was, no idea where to go. I tried asking for help, stopping the few people who passed, but their faces only twisted in confusion as I spoke. I gestured desperately, trying different words, slower, simpler, but nothing worked. They didn't understand me, and I didn't understand them. The panic threatened to take over, creeping up my spine like ice. I forced myself to keep walking, my eyes darting down the road, hoping, praying, that something, anything, would appear. Then, headlights. A car. My heart pounded as the vehicle approached, its engine humming steadily against the empty silence of the road. I stepped closer to the edge, raising my hand hesitantly, then more urgently as it neared. "Please stop." The car slowed. I held my breath as the tires rolled over the gravel and the window lowered. Inside, a man sat behind the wheel, his dark eyes scanning me with a mix of curiosity and concern. He looked to be in his mid-30s, his face calm but cautious. "Do you need help?" My breath hitched. He spoke my language. Relief flooded me so fast my knees almost gave out. I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth felt too raw, too dangerous to say out loud. I had no idea who this man was. I couldn't trust him, not yet. So I forced a weak smile and nodded. "Yes, I'm lost." He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the passenger seat. "Get in, I can take you to the nearest town." I hesitated. I knew better than to get into a stranger's car, but what choice did I have? The sun was setting, and I had nowhere to go. Swallowing hard, I pulled the door open and slid inside. The warmth of the car enveloped me, and for the first time since everything had happened, I felt a sliver of comfort. The man pulled back onto the road, driving smoothly, his gaze flickering toward me now and then. "You're traveling alone?" he asked, his tone careful. I clenched my hands in my lap. "Not exactly," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I was supposed to meet someone, but I let out a shaky breath. Things didn't go as planned." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I was saying. "Are you staying somewhere?" "My hotel is farther than I thought," I lied. I was trying to find a way back. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. You're lucky I came by. This road doesn't get much traffic this late. Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. The drive stretched on, the silence between us heavy. I kept my hands clenched in my lap, my mind racing, wondering how long I could keep up this act. You don't have luggage? He asked, his eyes flicking to my small backpack. I wasn't planning to stay long, I answered quickly. He didn't push further. After what felt like an eternity, lights appeared in the distance. A small town. Relief swelled in my chest. I'll drop you off at a cafe, he said. The owner's a friend. She might be able to help you. I nodded. Thank you. I really appreciate it. He pulled into a small parking lot and shifted the car into park. But before I could reach for the door handle, he spoke again. By the way, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing a badge. My breath caught. My name's Adam, he said. I'm a police officer. I'm off duty right now, which is why I'm not in uniform, but... He gave me a small, reassuring smile. You're safe now. I forced myself to nod, even as my heartbeat pounded in my ears. Safe. I wanted to believe that. But the truth was, I had never felt further from safety in my entire life. The office was small but orderly, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as I sat stiffly in a chair across from Adam, my fingers curled tightly around the fabric of my jacket. He had driven us here after realizing I had nowhere else to go. At first, I had protested. I didn't want to take up his time, and I definitely didn't want to be in a police station. But he had insisted, saying it was the safest place for now. And maybe he was right. Still, I felt out of place. Adam sat down across from me, his eyes scanning me carefully before he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. All right, he said, his voice calm, steady. Let's start with the basics. Do you have someone you can call? Family? Friends? I nodded instinctively, but when I opened my mouth, no names came. My stomach twisted. He noticed. You don't, do you? I swallowed hard, shaking my head. No one that could help me. Adam exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I could tell he was trying to figure out what to do with me. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with myself either. I was stuck. Completely, utterly stuck. He leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. You don't have to tell me everything, but I need to understand what's going on. Are you in trouble? I hesitated. Technically, I wasn't, but I wasn't safe either. My fingers tightened around the straps of my backpack, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had been holding everything in, trying to keep myself together, but I could feel the cracks forming. The weight of it all, being left behind, being alone in a foreign country, not knowing what to do next, it was too much. Adam must have noticed because his voice softened. I don't know what happened, but I can see that you're scared. And whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone. That was it. The final push. Something inside me snapped, and before I could stop myself, the words spilled out. My husband left me. The confession hung in the air between us, heavier than I expected. Adam didn't react right away. He just waited, letting me gather myself as my breathing grew unsteady. I clenched my hands together, my nails digging into my skin as I forced myself to keep going. We were on our honeymoon, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Everything was fine, or at least I thought it was. And then, he just drove off, left me there with nothing but my backpack. His number was disconnected. He vanished like I never existed. The words felt unreal even as I said them, like I was telling someone else's story. Adam's expression darkened. You're telling me he abandoned you? Just like that? I nodded, my throat tight. Yes. Silence stretched between us. Adam leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Jesus! I let out a shaky breath, my eyes burning. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. My voice broke, and I pressed my lips together, shaking my head. Adam studied me for a long moment, then sighed. Okay, he said finally. We'll figure this out. We. That word shouldn't have comforted me as much as it did. But for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I didn't feel completely alone. The room was small, but it was enough. A single bed with a thin blanket, a modest desk, a narrow closet, and a single window overlooking the quiet street below. The walls were plain, the air slightly stale, carrying the faint scent of dust and something vaguely metallic, but I didn't care. It was shelter, a locked door, a place where, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I could be alone. Adam had given me a few recommendations, places that wouldn't drain my account too quickly. Thankfully, I still had access to my bank funds. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent this small space for a little while. I had counted every dollar before paying, calculating how long I could survive before I had to make a real decision about what to do next. As soon as I set my backpack down on the desk, exhaustion settled into my bones. It wasn't just physical. It was deeper, heavier, like something was dragging me under. Every muscle ached, my head throbbed, and my limbs felt weighted, sluggish. I had been running on adrenaline, fear, and confusion for so long that now, when I was finally somewhere safe, my body didn't know how to react. I kicked off my shoes, let my jacket slide from my shoulders, and collapsed onto the bed. I wanted to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts circling back to Adam. Had I made a mistake? I barely knew him. Yes, he had helped me. He had given me a ride when no one else stopped, taken me to his office, helped me figure out a place to stay. But did that mean I could trust him? Did it mean he wasn't going to use what I told him against me later? I had been too desperate, too willing to accept help from a stranger. I had let my guard down, spilled everything to a man I had met just hours before. What if he reported me to someone? What if he decided I wasn't his problem anymore and left me to fend for myself? What if I had only traded one bad man for another? A chill ran down my spine, and I curled my fingers into the blanket, gripping it tightly. I knew nothing about this place, about the people here, about how things worked. My husband had planned everything for this trip. I had let him take control of everything. I had never bothered to learn the language, never thought I would need to navigate this place alone, and now I was paying for it. I turned onto my side, pulling my knees up slightly, my body tense. Maybe I shouldn't have told Adam everything. Maybe I should have lied, told him some vague story, kept the truth buried until I had figured out a real plan. But it was too late now. He knew. Would he come back tomorrow, asking more questions? Would he expect something in return for his help? I hated that I had to think this way, that I had to question even the people who had been kind to me. But I had thought I knew my husband too. And look where that had gotten me. I exhaled shakily, forcing myself to relax my grip on the blanket. For now, I had a roof over my head. I had a locked door. I had money, enough to survive for at least a little while. That had to be enough. Tomorrow I would figure out the rest. But tonight, I just needed to sleep. My body felt impossibly heavy as my eyelids drooped. The exhaustion was too much to fight any longer. And as I finally drifted off, the last thought that crossed my mind was a bitter one. I shouldn't have trusted him. I shouldn't trust anyone. The past 2 days had passed in a strange haze. I barely left my small room, only venturing out for food and the occasional walk to clear my head. My body was still exhausted, but my mind refused to settle. Sleep had come in short, restless bursts, filled with dreams I could barely remember, but left me waking up with a sense of unease. I had been trying to process everything, to make some kind of plan, but I kept coming up blank. Every time I thought about what had happened, my brain felt like it was short-circuiting, refusing to fully grasp the reality of my situation. I was alone in a foreign country. My husband had abandoned me, and I had no idea what to do next. But at least I was safe. That was something, or so I thought. The ringing of my phone startled me. I had almost forgotten I even had it. I glanced at the screen, my heart skipping a beat when I saw the name. Adam. For a second, I debated ignoring it, but something in my gut told me I shouldn't. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. Hello? Where have you been? His voice was tense, edged with something I couldn't quite place. Why haven't you answered any of my calls? I blinked, confused. this is the first time you've called. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. Your phone must have been off. I've been trying to reach you. My stomach twisted. Why? You need to come to the station, tomorrow morning. His voice was firm, almost urgent. There's something I need to tell you. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. What is it? A pause. Then, it's about your husband. My blood ran cold. I gripped the phone tighter, my pulse thudding against my ribs. Tell me now. It's better if we talk in person. No, I snapped, surprising even myself. You don't get to call me like this. Tell me it's about him, and then make me wait until tomorrow. Either you tell me now, or I'm coming there. Adam was silent for a long moment, then sighed. Fine. Come now. I was already grabbing my bag before the call even ended. The police station was quiet when I arrived. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, and the overhead lights cast a dull glow over the desks and filing cabinets. Adam was waiting for me, his expression unreadable. You got here fast, he said. You didn't give me a choice, I shot back. What did you find? He studied me for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Then, finally, he motioned for me to follow him into a small office. The door shut behind me with a soft click. Adam sat down behind the desk, opening a folder filled with papers. He pulled out a photograph and placed it in front of me. My breath caught in my throat. It was him, my husband. Only, it wasn't just one photo. There were several, different locations, different women. My hands trembled as I reached for them. What is this? I whispered. Adam leaned forward, his gaze steady. Your husband? He's a con man, a scam artist. He's done this before, many times. My mind reeled. No, that's not possible. Adam's jaw tightened. I've been digging into his background since you told me what happened, and I found records, complaints, reports, even police files from other countries. He's been doing this for years, marrying women, stealing their money, their belongings, and disappearing. Always in a different country, always with a different name. My stomach twisted violently. My voice broke. That doesn't make sense. Adam exhaled. I know it's hard to hear, but this isn't just about you. There are other women, dozens, maybe more. Some came forward, but by the time the police got involved, he was already gone, just like he did to you. I shook my head, my vision blurring. It couldn't be true. But the photos said otherwise, the documents, the way he had left me without hesitation. Oh my God, I had been nothing to him, just another victim. A cold, bitter realization settled into my chest. I clenched my fists. We can't let him get away with this. Adam's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw something different in his expression. Approval. You're right, he said, and we won't. And in that moment, for the first time since all of this began, I knew. I could trust him. The investigation moved quickly. Adam worked tirelessly, connecting the pieces of my story with those of other victims. Every detail I provided helped build a case against him, against the man I had once called my husband, but now knew was nothing more than a fraud, a predator who had used love as a weapon. The more I learned, the harder it was to accept that I had been just another target. There were others, so many others. Women from different countries, different backgrounds, all with the same story, falling for his charm, trusting him, only to be abandoned and robbed of everything. Some had spoken up, but by the time they did, he was long gone, his identity changed, his next victim already chosen. But this time, he had made a mistake. He had left a loose end. Me. And I wasn't going to let him do this again. With enough evidence, authorities in multiple countries coordinated to track him down. Witness testimonies, financial records, surveillance footage. Everything was compiled into an airtight case. And then, one morning, Adam called me. They got him. I sat frozen, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Where? At an airport, Adam said. Trying to leave the country. He must have realized the net was closing in. My stomach twisted at the thought of him boarding a plane, slipping away to start his cycle all over again. If we had been even a day later, he would have disappeared. But now he had nowhere left to run. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. I just sat there, letting the weight of it all settle over me. A trial followed. I was asked to testify, and though it terrified me, I did it. I stood in that courtroom and spoke the truth, not just for myself, but for every woman who had been used and discarded like she didn't matter. He sat there, watching me, his expression unreadable. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. He was found guilty, for fraud, for theft, for the countless crimes he had committed under false identities. The sentence was long, and though it would never undo the damage he had done, it was justice. It was over. And yet, even after he was locked away, even after the world moved on, I was left with the pieces of my own life to rebuild. The scars he left weren't physical, but they ran deep. Trust felt like a foreign concept. Every time I met someone new, I wondered what they wanted from me. Every act of kindness made me question the motive behind it. But I wasn't alone. Adam never treated me like a victim. He never pitied me or acted as if I were broken. He treated me like a person, someone who had been through hell but was still standing. We stayed in touch long after the case was closed. At first, it was small things, a check-in, a coffee, a shared meal. But over time, it became something more, a real friendship. He had been the one to save me when I had nothing and no one, and I knew I would never forget that. I didn't have anywhere to go. The idea of returning home felt wrong. The person I had been before all of this, before him, no longer existed. And I didn't want to go back to a place that would remind me of everything I had lost. So I stayed. The town that had once been a place of nightmares slowly became my refuge. I found work, built a routine, and let myself believe, little by little, that life could move forward. The pain didn't disappear overnight. Some wounds take longer to heal, but each day it hurt a little less. And as the months passed, I realized something. I had thought I lost everything, but in the end, I had gained something unexpected. A second chance. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Life in the small town settled into a comforting rhythm. I found a job at a local bookstore, a quaint little place with creaky wooden floors and the comforting scent of aged paper. The owner, Mrs. Thompson, a kind woman in her 60s, took me under her wing, and soon the store felt like a second home. Adam and I continued to see each other regularly. Our friendship deepened, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. He introduced me to his favorite hiking trails, and I showed him the joy of getting lost in a good book. We spent countless evenings together, sometimes in comfortable silence, other times in deep conversation about life, dreams, and everything in between. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves painted the town in hues of gold and crimson, Adam invited me to a local fair. The air was filled with laughter, the sweet aroma of caramel apples, and the distant melodies of a folk band. We wandered through the stalls, playing games and sampling treats. It was the most carefree I had felt in a long time. As the night deepened, we found ourselves on a hill overlooking the fairgrounds. The town below twinkled with lights, and the stars above mirrored them. Adam spread out a blanket, and we sat side by side, the cool breeze brushing against our faces. He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "These past months with you have been transformative. I've watched you rebuild your life with such strength and grace. Somewhere along the way, my feelings for you grew into something more than friendship." I felt a warmth spread through me, a mixture of surprise and a realization of my own feelings. "Adam, He held up a hand, a gentle smile on his lips. "You don't have to say anything now. I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, our friendship means the world to me." I reached out, placing my hand over his. "Thank you for telling me, and for everything." The days that followed were filled with introspection. I cherished our friendship deeply, but I couldn't deny the blossoming feelings that had taken root in my heart. The fear of vulnerability lingered, but with Adam, it felt different. Safe. One evening, As we sat in the bookstore after hours, surrounded by the comforting presence of countless stories, I turned to him. "Adam, about what you said at the fair." He looked up from the book he was thumbing through, his expression attentive. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I continued, "and I've realized that my feelings for you have also grown into something deeper. I want to see where this can go, together." A radiant smile spread across his face. "I'd like that very much." Our relationship evolved naturally, the foundation of our friendship providing a sturdy base. We supported each other's dreams and faced challenges together. The town became our shared canvas, each day adding new colors to our story. One snowy evening, nearly a year after that fateful day we met, Adam took me to the hill where he had first confessed his feelings. The town below was blanketed in snow, twinkling with festive lights. He knelt down, producing a small velvet box. "You've brought immeasurable joy into my life. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness welled up in my eyes. "Yes, Adam. 1,000 times, yes." Our wedding was a simple, intimate affair, attended by the friends we had made in the town that had become our home. Mrs. Thompson stood by my side as a surrogate mother, and the bookstore was adorned with flowers and fairy lights for the reception. As we danced under the stars, I reflected on my journey. From the depths of betrayal and despair, I had risen, finding love and a sense of belonging I had never imagined. Adam had been my anchor, and together, we had crafted a beautiful life. In his arms, I found not just love, but a partner, a confidant, and a home. The scars of the past remained, but they were now reminders of my strength and the path that had led me to this moment of profound happiness.